Hi everybody and Happy New Year! We are officially into the year of 2022 and I'm so excited for today's tutorial. So I am Lysha for anybody who is brand new to my channel, and I am the owner of Lysha Be Creative. On my channel here, we create things that are Tumbler tutorial related and lots of epoxy resin crafts as well. So welcome if you're brand new, and thank you for coming on back if you're a returning subscriber. So to kick off the year 2022, I wanted to do this super cute 3D style mug. So you guys have seen me do something similar in a past tutorial, but I actually got this idea from one of you subscribers. You guys had mentioned that you wanted to see a 3D cable knit sweater, and I found some inspiration for some other makers, and I decided to put my twist and my spin on this cup. So we are going to make a 3D cable knit sweater using a little bit of vinyl and a little bit of a cheap method and hack, so you don't have to use sculpting clay. And of course, you guys know that everything that I use in my tutorials are always listed and linked down in the description box down below. You'll also find any discount codes that I have for products that I use in my everyday crafting, as well as links to all of my social media. If you're new or if you haven't done so already, give this video a huge thumbs up if you enjoyed today's tutorial, and consider subscribing to my channel, as well as clicking that notification bell so you know when I post my videos. So I post videos every single Saturday at 9 a.m. and you do not want to miss what I have planned for the year 2022. So I feel like that is definitely more than enough for me today. Let's go ahead and jump right into the first video of the new year. Hey everybody, so I am starting with a 12-ounce morning mug from the Steel Magnolia Company, and I have some vinyl that I got from Shop Vinyl Gallery. I of course will link that website down in the description box down below. So right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my blue painter's tape to separate the mug in half of the mug. So essentially what I'm trying to do is create that invisible line there that I'll kind of use as my guideline to apply my vinyl. One half of this cup is going to be vinyl and the other half is going to be that 3D cable knit look. So it is a little bit tricky to get the line of painter's tape around the handle area, so I did have to rip apart my tape just to try and create that line. And I'm eyeballing here. You could very well, measure the halfway point of your cup. I just felt that it was a bit easier for me to eyeball it, especially with the handle being a little bit of a hassle to get around as well. So now that I have that done, I'm just going to measure one half of the cup that I'm going to be applying the vinyl to. That way I can cut the exact piece that I need. I will make sure to give myself just a little bit of extra on the top and bottom so that I don't have to worry about being extremely precise, but I want to cut only as much of the vinyl that I'll need as possible so that I can save the rest of this vinyl for future projects. So I'm just going to trim up that edge of the vinyl, that kind of white excess that you find on the edges of your vinyl, and then I'm going to cut my piece. So the piece that I needed was about 5 inches wide by about 4 inches in height, and so I'm just going to measure on my vinyl so that I can cut the piece that I need and get this onto my cup. Now with the piece of vinyl that I have ready, I'm just going to be starting with the vinyl on one end of the cup. And so because I know that the toughest part for putting this vinyl on is going to be to get it around the handle, that's the end that I'm going to start with. So I'm just taking a pen and marking where I need to cut slits on my vinyl so that I can fit the handle of the mug in between the vinyl so that I can have that line of the edge of the vinyl right underneath the halfway point of that handle. So just taking my scissors, I'm just making those 2 slits on each part of where the handle goes, and I'm just going to flip that section up, and then you'll see that I am going to cut that with scissors as well, but I want to make sure that I don't need to make those slits any wider before I go and commit to cutting that section entirely. So now that I feel pretty confident about the area where my handles will go, I am going to cut that little section of extra vinyl off, and then you're going to see me peel back the vinyl so that I can apply this vinyl directly to my tumbler. Now with that edge peeled back, I'm now ready to apply this to my mug. So normally I'd use my cup cradle here to help hold my mug. However, because the handle typically gets in the way when I'm using my cup cradle, I just decided to keep it on my flat surface of my table and apply the vinyl that way. You can certainly do whatever is easiest for you. I definitely find that my cup cradle does help, except for when it comes to handled mugs. So now that I am kind of sure that my vinyl is going to reach on either end and that it's straight, I'm just going to use my squeegee tool, which I use for applying my vinyl, and squeeze out any of the air bubbles and anything that may be leaving any sort of wrinkles or anything in my vinyl to help get a super smooth look onto my cup. So once I get to the very edge, I am going to use the sharp edge of my vinyl squeegee tool there to just help me determine where the tape is underneath, and then I'm going to use my craft knife to cut just along that tape line on the other side and cut off this extra vinyl. So now with that removed, I can go ahead and focus on the top and bottom. For the top section, I'm just going to very carefully pull that vinyl up over the top edge and then just use my craft knife to cut along that top edge, being very careful not to cut myself with that sharp knife and cut off the extra vinyl on the top portion of this mug. For the bottom portion, I'm going to do kind of the same thing, except for I'm going to be using my cup edging tool, which I purchased from Amazon. That will be linked down in the description box down below. So I'm just going to pull over that vinyl right over that bottom edge, making sure not to create any creases or wrinkles, and then I am going to flatten those pieces directly onto the bottom so that I can use my cup edging tool to help me cut that super straight line around the bottom of the vinyl piece. So this is going to leave just a little bit of a gap from the bottom of the cup, which I'm going to cover up later with just a little bit of glitter on that cable knit side and any of the white exposed paint that I have there. Finally, I'll go ahead and remove that tape and move on to the next step in the process. So now it's time to get the stenciling or the cable knit sweater pattern on the flip side of the cup. So I just cut my stencil or my SVG out on some blue vinyl, and the reason why I'm doing this is because I know I'm going to be painting it later before I apply my glitter. So I did just measure that and make sure that the section that I cut out of my cut file was going to fit on that side. So you can certainly slice what you need in Cricut Design Space, or you can print the full sheet like I did and just measure out how much of a section that you're going to need. Whatever is easiest for you. So now, in order to make sure that I don't get any of my paint that we're going to be using onto my vinyl, I am just going to kind of cover up those edges. That way my sticky transfer tape doesn't pull up any of the vinyl. So now with transfer tape, I am going to apply transfer tape to the entire sheet. Because these pieces are so small, I didn't want to have to weed first. I wanted to reverse weed with this just because I wanted to make sure that I didn't lose any of those small pieces, as I had a tough time the last time I applied a similar pattern to my ugly Christmas sweater tumbler that I did a few weeks back. So I'm just going to apply this full sheet of transfer tape directly to my cut file here, and then I'm going to remove that paper backing and I will reverse weed, which just means that I'm going to pull up the pieces that I do not need, which is the back blue portion that is surrounding this, so that it just exposes that little cable knit look throughout the SVG here. So I hope that makes sense. Essentially, reverse weeding is just kind of an easier way to get your vinyl removed without having to worry about any of your small pieces lifting when you're trying to weed the traditional way, which typically happens when you're doing any small lettering or anything that just has a lot of small pieces on your printed or cut image. So once that is removed, I then am going to place this directly on the white side and get it applied. I like to replace the backing from my SVG back on to the pattern just so that I don't get the entire piece to secure to the tumbler before I'm ready. So I just leave kind of that edge of the transfer tape exposed so that I can kind of get that piece to stick down and then be able to peel off the backing rather, and then pull tautly to apply the rest of the the pattern here. So I'm going to use a little bit of tape here to kind of anchor down that one end. Just for whatever reason, my transfer tape did not want to stick to that piece of transfer tape, or piece of blue painter's tape, I should say, rather. So I did just use a little piece of tape to adhere that, and then I am going to apply that to the side. So the way that I had measured this out, I measured it so that when the cable knit sweater pattern met on the other side, that it didn't overlap the handle whatsoever. So it was almost a perfect fit, and I didn't have to worry about having to cut any of the cable knit pattern around the handle, which was perfect because I knew that that would be a little bit tough to do with this kind of a pattern, and it probably would look a little bit funny. So definitely something to keep in mind if you're looking to recreate something like this down the line. So I'm just going to remove that backing and apply this pattern. And again, I chose blue because I wanted it to be something that I could see while I was using the paint that we're going to use to create that 3D effect. I didn't want to use white because I was afraid I wouldn't be able to see the outline of the cable knit pieces to be able to apply the paint that I need. So I'm going to remove the transfer tape here, and then we are going to move into applying the fabric paint that we're going to use to give that 3D look to this mug. Okay, so now to give this mug a 3D look, I'm going to be using some white fabric paint. So it's that Tulip brand that you can literally buy from Walmart, from the craft store. It's just the traditional fabric paint. You could also use puffy paint, and the puffy paint version will definitely give you a steeper look in the sense of the cable knit part, or wherever you're applying this type of paint, will definitely be have more of a 3D effect, if that makes sense. This type of paint, it's a slick paint that dries rather flat, so it still will be a 3D look, but it won't be as prominent as if you were going to use the puffy paint version. So some tricks for applying this paint is, number one, this is a brand new bottle, and I did make sure to shake up this bottle really well, because what you don't want to happen is when you get to the end of a bottle of paint or anything, when you get those little air bubbles that are kind of trapped in the bottle, because then that makes your paint go all over the place. So definitely having a brand new bottle, or a very, very shaken well bottle that has all the paint down at the top end of your bottle, that way you don't run into any of those air bubbles that may happen. So I literally am just tracing the outline and filling in those cable knit sweater pieces and going all the way down each line. I definitely would start on the end that you don't write with, if that makes sense. So I'm left-handed, so I made sure to start on the farthest right so that I wasn't dragging my hand through the paint. So definitely something to keep in mind too. And this is tedious work. It is going to take you quite a bit of time. My fingers did start to cramp a little bit from holding onto the bottle and squeezing each piece. So definitely take your time. You can also take breaks as well. This paint really does stay put, but you could also put it on your turner and give it a little time so you can rest your hands or whatever before you continue to go. So I'm going to just continue to cover this in this paint here, going through each section. It probably took me about, I want to say, probably 30 minutes. I did take a break in between and was working on a couple of other things at the same time when my fingers started to cramp up a little bit. But it does take you a little bit of time, and I'm only doing half of the mug. So obviously if you're doing a larger section than a half of a tumbler, it definitely is going to take you a little bit more time to get this kind of done or accomplished. So I'm just going to finish up this edge. I did find that getting closer to the handle was a little bit harder to make sure that my paint coverage on those little pieces of cable knit sweater was even, and I did have to go in and touch a couple of them up so that it was evenly placed. But I love that it doesn't have to be perfect too. I think you still get a perfectly gorgeous look even if all of your paint spots are not perfect in the sense of the coverage of the paint, but I definitely recommend choosing vinyl that is easier for you to see, because I can only imagine how tough this would have been if I would have chosen to do it in white vinyl. So I'm going to finish that up. This will go on my turner for about 24 hours to dry, and then I am going to move into the next step. So now that my paint has dried, it did take about 24 hours, I would say, for it to dry. And so now I'm going to glitter this section inside. So I'm just taking my Mod Podge and a makeup brush here that I like to use to apply my Mod Podge with. And I'm going to cover the entire sections that are white with Mod Podge so that we can apply some glitter. I did tape off my vinyl on the other side just with blue painter's tape. I just wanted to make sure I didn't accidentally get any paint or glitter on that side. Feel free to do whatever works best for you, but because I knew I needed to go in and cover that bottom edge, I like to be super quick about applying my Mod Podge because I hate when it dries on me and then I have to go in and do multiple coats. So I am going to just cover this entire section with my Mod Podge, paying extra attention to my handle because I want to make sure that I get full coverage on the first try and not have to go back in for very many touch-ups if I can avoid it altogether. So once I've done that, I'm going to be using a white glitter mix that I have had for quite a bit of time. I've actually used this in a couple of past videos. It's a mix of fairy dust from Vinyl Gallery and Hedwig from Peachy Olive Glitter. So it's got a little bit of sparkle, but it also has that matte white glitter, Hedwig from Peachy Olive Glitters, which just gives it that pure white look. So I'm just going to cover the entire cup with this glitter, making sure to get full coverage throughout the entire cup, and then I will let this completely dry so that I can go into my first coats of epoxy. Once my Mod Podge has dried a little bit, I'll then go in and remove the painter's tape from the other side so that that doesn't pull up any of my glitter once the Mod Podge is fully dry. So I haven't put epoxy on this yet, but I am going to seal this with 2x clear gloss Rustoleum spray paint to make sure that I don't get any migrating glitter onto my vinyl section, and so I can keep that section nice and clean. So I am going to show you next how I apply my epoxy to a handled mug. It is very important that obviously you give these kinds of mugs extra attention to make sure that you get full coverage with your epoxy and get full coverage on your handles. So my Mod Podge has dried. I did let it sit for probably about 1 hour or so until I really felt confident that it was dry. I applied 2 coats of Rustoleum clear gloss spray paint to seal in that white glitter, and now it's time for epoxy. So I'm taking a full 30 mLs, although I am not going to use the full amount, and I'm going to apply epoxy to this mug. So I like to put epoxy on the whole round section of the mug, if that makes sense, before I focus on the handle. So I like to focus on, you know, the larger portion of the cup, and then I go back in and really give my mug handle a lot of extra attention because I want to make sure that I'm getting full coverage. I have done plenty of mugs before where I have not gotten full coverage on the mug, or just not good enough coverage in all of my coats, and that becomes a pain in the butt because then you can feel the glitter on your handles and then the rest of your mug is super smooth. So it's definitely not something that I want to avoid, if you will. So I definitely make sure to really go around my mug handle really well, top and bottom, making sure that I am using, you know, my pointer finger and thumb to really make sure that I am covering all of the edges of that mug handle to make sure that I'm getting full coverage and then I have an even coat of epoxy throughout. Once I'm done applying epoxy, I will torch this with my kitchen torch to pop any bubbles, and then I will let that cure for 2 hours and go in with a flood coat, a second coat of epoxy. So after my 2 coats of epoxy, it is now time to apply my SVG. So this is a Stay Cozy file that I actually found in Cricut Design Space. I typically use a lot of the images and hand-lettered files right from Cricut Design Space, but I did also link down in the description a similar file that I found on Etsy. That's a great alternative if you don't or can't find this file in Cricut Design Space. So I did create an offset as well for this file. It's an offset of 0.111. It's typically my go-to setting for creating an offset because then the offset is not too thick around. And so now I'm going to apply that to the vinyl side of my cup here. And additionally, what I forgot to mention is I did also cut out a 3-inch circle just using the shapes feature in Cricut Design Space for the bottom of the mug as well. I just wanted it to kind of have like a finishing touch, if you will, to the mug altogether. And I thought that applying that piece of pattern vinyl on the bottom really did bring it all together. So this mug got 1 final coat of epoxy using Amazing Clear Cast Plus, and that is the final coat of epoxy needed before this mug was finished. So I really had a lot of fun putting this mug together. It was super cute, and it gave that subtle 3D look that I was really looking for. So I hope that you enjoyed today's tutorial. It is the first one of the new year, so definitely make sure you give it some love. Leave me a comment, leave me any questions that you have down in the comment section, and I will see you guys again next week.